Welcome, race fans, to Pump the Brakes, the one, the only, the Cadillac of Formula One podcast. I am your host, the Pit Lane Patriot. My face is sunburnt and I'm pretty sure that I dislocated my left arm, but I am safely home from the Miami Grand Prix. I experienced the whole weekend. We got lots to talk about. It was sick. We're going to talk about the Miami GP. We're going to talk about news all around the grid. And of course, we're going to talk about some Team Cadillac.
Yes, let's go.
But first, some news from this morning. Terry Crews has officially launched his show on YouTube entitled Cruise Control, where he goes behind the scenes with the Cadillac team. Terry Crews is a huge fan of this team and this journey. I met him at the car launch, got to high five him, showed him the pump the brake sign. He loves this journey. I suggest you all go check out Cruise Control on YouTube if you love you some Terry Crews or some Cadillac. But on to our first topic, the Miami Grand Prix.
The Miami Grand Prix is underway. Kimi Antonelli crawling off.
Before we get into the actual race weekend, I just want to say this one thing on a personal level. Miami was awesome. I had a great time. Sitting there with the starting line was amazing. Hearing those cars in person, feeling how loud and violent the real F1 circuit actually feels like and sounds like was absolutely sick. Seeing celebrities around the event, seeing people like Terry Crews, seeing champions, both current and former. And from a Cadillac point of view, honestly, it was encouraging, even though it was a little humbling. Yeah, Cadillac fans were definitely the minority. The cars visibly slower, so yeah, we're in the back. And when you see it in person, it really hits you that we are starting from the back. So, not to put a damper on anything, but it's good to see in person that we have work to do, because we got work to do, and we're doing it. And that's the whole point.
That challenge is one that we're willing to accept, and one we intend to win.
All right, the 2026 Miami Grand Prix is in the books, and outside of Cadillac, this weekend felt pretty much what Miami is supposed to be. Loud, messy, dramatic, full of story. It was the first race back after a really long break, and the first weekend with the FIA's new rule tweaks in effect. And there was a sprint format on top of that. So right away, Miami had pressure. It wasn't just a return to racing. It was a return with big upgrades, big expectations, weather drama, and a whole bunch of teams trying to prove they actually used the month off well. Let's start with the sprint, because that was the first real statement of the weekend. Lando Norris put McLaren on pole in sprint qualifying ahead of Kimi Antonelli, Oscar Piastri, and Charles Leclerc. And that mattered because it immediately told you that McLaren had shown up with something real after the break. This was not just another weekend of surviving. Norris was quickest. Antonelli was right there, but the top of the grid was definitely Norris. Then in the sprint itself, McLaren cashed in. Norris wins it. Piastri made it to a McLaren 1-2, and Leclerc grabbed third for Ferrari. Sprint results made it look like Mercedes doesn't quite have such a signed, sealed, and delivered season after all. It was Mercedes' first defeat of the season in any format, which instantly made the result feel bigger than just a short Saturday points dash. And the way it happened mattered too, because Antonelli had another messy start. He crossed the finish line in fourth, and then he got hit with a 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits and dropped to sixth. So the sprint told us two things at once. It told us that McLaren is alive, and Mercedes, for the first time all season, looks beatable. This made the sprint one of the biggest headlines of the weekend, because after all the talk about McLaren bringing a major step to Miami, they actually came and backed it. They actually brought that winning strategy to Miami. Norris winning, Piastri right behind him, huge statement for McLaren. Then we got to the qualifying, and Miami flipped again. Kimi Antonelli bounced back right after his bad sprint and immediately took his third consecutive pole position. In the last three races, Kimi Antonelli has qualified in pole at the top in all three races, which is kind of insane when you think about how quickly this kid has gotten from huge prospect to main character. The only other two drivers in history to go 3 consecutive poles for their first 3 poles and start their career like that are Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna. So Kimi Antonelli is entering some legendary company. And qualifying had more drama than just the pole fight. So Max Verstappen did stick the Red Bull on the front row, Charles Leclerc put the Ferrari in third, and Norris had to settle for fourth. George Russell was only fifth in this race. Now, I believe George Russell to be the championship favorite, and while he has said in the past that Miami is not great for him, being in fifth with the best car is bad. Hamilton in sixth, Piastri only seventh. Another major headline during the qualifying was Gabriel Bortoletto's Audi caught fire during the session. I did not get to see that part in person, but I did see it on the screen, and everyone was going crazy that Bortoletto's back of his car actually caught on fire. So Miami qualifying wasn't just fast, it was twitchy, disruptive, and exactly the kind of session where you could feel the whole paddock is still adjusting to the new era and the new balance of power. And then came Sunday, and the weather had made the whole day feel kind of weird before the lights had even went out. Rain and thunderstorms were such a concern that the officials moved the Grand Prix up 3 hours, from 4 p.m. to 1 p.m. Major bummer for myself. I wanted to see a rain race. They moved it up. Sucks. The drivers still hadn't raced these 2026 cars in the wet at this point, and lightning was a serious enough worry that full shelter procedures were part of the discussion. So even before the race started, Miami had the feeling that the day was going to be very off script. And that's what made the day feel so interesting. Rain was expected, but the Formula 1 race itself stayed dry. Now, earlier in the day, Formula 2 had run a wet and chaotic feature race in Miami with multiple safety cars, drying conditions, and drivers sliding around on overheating wet tires in closing laps. It was a crazy race, one of my favorite things that I saw. We'll talk a little more about it later. So by the time F1 rolled around, it really didn't feel much like one of those perfectly clean, settled race days. The weather had still been hanging over everything, the support race had already been chaotic, and the whole event still had an unstable Miami energy to it. It just had that Grand Prix feeling more alive. It was great. And then the race itself absolutely delivered. Antonelli won again, his third straight victory, but it was not some calm drive at the front. Right from the start, he was in a three-way fight with Verstappen and Leclerc into turn 1. Both the Mercedes and Red Bull locked up, and then Verstappen spun shortly after that and dropped down the order. That immediately blew the race open. So instead of a clean, pole to lead to win kind of afternoon, Miami gave Antonelli a race where he had to survive the chaos first and earn that win. Behind him, the McLarens kept the pressure on all day. Norris finished second, only 3.2 seconds behind Antonelli, and Piastri ended up third after a wild late race scramble. So Norris and Piastri continued their consistency over the weekend. McLaren made a statement. They came to play, and they came with upgrades. And this scramble was kind of one of the biggest headlines of the afternoon because Ferrari looked like it had a podium on lock with Leclerc until it didn't. Over the final 2 laps, Piastri stole third, Leclerc spun and somehow kept going, Russell got on him for fourth, and then Verstappen snatched fifth from Leclerc right at the line. So the top 5 at the flag ended up being Antonelli, Norris, Piastri, Russell, and Verstappen, with Leclerc falling behind all of them. And honestly, one of the biggest takeaways from Miami is that Antonelli is no longer just a breakout story. He is the standard now. He's leading the championship. He has won three in a row, 3 straight poles, and he keeps responding even when parts of the weekend go sideways. The sprint didn't go his way. He got penalized. Mercedes lost a short distance, and he came right back and took pole and the Grand Prix. This is a championship driver behavior. This is not just talented rookie or beginner's luck. Miami made that hard, and Kimi Antonelli still delivered. Second biggest takeaway, McLaren is for real. I say this again. They did not get the main Grand Prix win, but they did get the sprint, and they took second and third in the race. They look far more dangerous than they did before the break. They look like a brand new team. They showed us why they are the defending champion. Miami was supposed to be the first proper test of whether McLaren's new package actually changed things. I'd say the answer is a definitive yes. It's not enough to topple Mercedes over a full weekend, but it's absolutely enough to put themselves properly back in the conversation, like they did by winning a sprint. It's just not good enough to win a Grand Prix as it stands right now. Ferrari, meanwhile, comes out of Miami feeling like the team that was close. They weren't quite sharp enough where it mattered most. Leclerc and Hamilton were both in the mix all weekend, and Ferrari was still visibly part of the lead group. But then when the race got frantic late, the team lost out. That doesn't mean Ferrari had a bad weekend. It just means that they had a weekend that reminds you exactly where they are right now. They're good enough to matter, but not quite clean enough to control the story. And then there's Red Bull, where the feeling is still weird. Verstappen actually gave some more optimistic comments earlier in the weekend, saying that the upgrades were making him more confident in the car, which is the first hopeful Red Bull quote we've had from him in a while. But the weekend as a whole still looked unstable. Hadjar's disqualification to the back over the floorboard error was ugly. Verstappen never really looked like a true threat for a win. And even with the race salvaged to 5th, Red Bull still feels like a team trying to stop the bleeding rather than reassert itself. So my overall read on the non-Cadillac side of Miami is this. Antonelli came out strong, McLaren came out alive, Ferrari came out frustrated, and Red Bull still looks unsettled but with potential. The sprint mattered because it showed the month off helped McLaren. Qualifying mattered because Antonelli and Mercedes showed that they still know how to hit back. And the race mattered, even without the expected rain actually falling, which I wanted it to. The whole day still had that edge of chaos Miami feeling that made the result feel dramatic. And that's why Miami felt so important. It wasn't just round 4. It was the first race after the break, first live test of the tweaks and upgrades, and the first real check on whether the season was about to harden into a Mercedes march or stay interesting. After what we saw this weekend, I'd say the answer is Mercedes is still the benchmark, but this season is still very much alive. And as we always do on this podcast, next, let's talk about some Team Cadillac. So Miami was one of those weekends where Cadillac gave you a reason to feel two things at once. On the one hand, no, the result was not some giant breakthrough. They still finished near the back, with Checo finishing 16th and Valtteri finishing 18th in the Grand Prix. But on the other hand, it was still their first home race and their third straight double finish. So another weekend where you could see real signs that the team was slowly, stubbornly starting to build something. So the honest vibe coming out of Miami is not satisfaction, but it is encouragement. So the first thing to say is that Cadillac did not come to Miami empty-handed. This was the team's first home race, and they brought a significant upgrade package just for the occasion. It was focused on areas like the floor, the braking, and the front wing, as well as load management, which has been a huge issue of the team thus far. And with the aim of improving aero performance and reducing weight, and honestly, the early signal was not bad. In the sprint qualifying, Perez said that the pace looked promising and that at some point they looked like they may actually make Q2, which for Cadillac would have meant real progress, and it would have been awesome to see that. When I was watching it, I was biting my nails hoping we'd get into Q2. It was so close. And even though the final positions were only 19th and 20th, Bottas said that the car felt way better with the upgrade and that they had definitely gained some management on the way that they distribute the load of the car, especially in high and medium speed corners. And that matters because one of the biggest Cadillac themes all season has been the need for more rear confidence and more overall load management. We've discussed this on this podcast before. Cadillac's been having issues distributing the weight along the car. The car is not only heavy, but the way it's distributed is not allowing the drivers to have enough confidence going into things like high and medium speed corners. The sprint itself was another small step instead of a giant lead. Cadillac got another double finish with Perez in 16th and Bottas 19th. And the team themselves had said that they continued to make progress on home soil and were fairly satisfied with the progress. Perez said that they had learned a lot, and Bottas said that the gap to the midfield was getting closer, which is really the key phrase here. That's what Miami is about for Cadillac right now. It's not about miracle points, it's not about a fantasy, but it's closing the gap enough to the teams to start to feel like we actually belong in fights rather than just by ourselves at the back. And then came qualifying on Saturday, and this is where the weekend stayed a little frustrating because Bottas ended up 20th and Perez on 21st, so it was ugly on paper. Perez admitted that the session was messy, said the second run mistake was on him, and then he said he had an energy deployment problem on the third lap that ruined that run too. Bottas was a little bit more positive and said that the car felt a lot better after changing from the sprint, adding that the gap to the midfield was getting closer. So the story of the Miami qualifying was pretty much that the same as the story of Cadillac's entire season. The package is getting better, but we're still leaving way too much on the table. And then on Sunday, I think Cadillac had a pretty respectable day for where the team is right now. Perez fought hard, spent time fighting Fernando Alonso over at the back, and said that in the race they were really racing and that it was a lot of fun. He also said that Miami showed some real flashes, promising qualifying pace, decent sprint, good pit stops, and a sign that the team is not far away from finding a few more clicks of performance. Bottas had a rougher afternoon, including a drive-through penalty after his pit limiter wasn't engaged properly, but even in that frustration, he still called the weekend an important one for a U.S. team racing at home and said that it had been a progress in many areas. That's kind of like the whole Miami strong point there. It's not clean, it's not perfect, but it's real. And what I really like is the tone coming out of the leadership side. Graham Loudon said that Miami was a positive step forward. He pointed to the fact that we had another double result across the sprint and the Grand Prix, and that the team had been able to race with other cars on pace, while he also made it clear that there's still more to refine. Dan Towers, the CEO, said that he was proud of the team under the pressure of the first home race, and the first significant upgrade package, that there's flashes of progress, and it just made them hungrier for more. It's the right tone. Not fake celebration, not panic, just a clear acknowledgement that the team is moving forward, even if it still has a lot of road left to cover. So my verdict on Cadillac in Miami is this: not a breakthrough, but a meaningful step forward. Another meaningful step. We could be doing better. We're leaving way too much on the table. Both of our drivers are still saying that the car is losing performance because of very obvious things that they're pointing out, and we need to get on top of this. The team has 3 weeks until Canada. That gives them plenty of time to refine what they need to refine and get ready for another major race. I think we're getting closer to Q2, which is fantastic, and we just might get there in Canada. So last, before we wrap up, let's discuss a little F2.
That was sick. Every part of that race. So good.
All right, so let's talk about some Formula 2, because that was actually one of the cooler parts of the Miami weekend, especially for me getting to see a rain race. The Miami weekend for Formula 2 was running just alongside Formula 1, and for us that mattered for one obvious reason: our boy, Colton Herta. And honestly, the weekend started exactly how you'd want it to. Herta topped free practice for High Tech in front of the home crowd, and F2's own coverage quoted him saying it was great to be home after leading the session and feeling like there was still way more to come. So right away, Miami felt different for him than Melbourne had. It felt more comfortable. It felt more natural. And topping the session gave you a sense that maybe this could truly be his first clean F2 weekend. Now, qualifying did bring things back down to earth a little bit. Official F2 reports say that Kush Miney took pole position in a very tight session, while Colton Herta ended up in 14th. Herta was quickest in practice, but qualified 14th after a mistake he made on his final run, which fits the broader theme of what we've seen on him so far. Flashes of real pace, but still not quite polished and putting it together when it matters most. That's important because now it's pretty clear that the biggest thing keeping him from bigger results, the raw speed, is there, but there's things he needs to work on. Then came the sprint race, and this was more solid than spectacular. Herta was moving forward early and made a bold pass on John Bennett to get himself up to P13 in the opening phase. Colton ultimately finished in 15th in the sprint, so no points there, but also kind of not a disaster because he raced aggressively, he gave it a good shot, and this is really a result of a bad qualifying, if anything. The feature race is where things got interesting, and honestly really valuable for Colton. First of all, this was a wet weather race, and that mattered by itself. This is exactly the kind of race that can either rattle a driver or teach him a ton. And for Colton, I think it was more the second one. Just getting that wet weather Formula 2 experience in a crazy Miami race is good for him, full stop. And then there was the strategy piece. This is the detail that I really liked. When the safety car came out, the majority of the field came in for their mandatory pit stops, but Joshua Dirksen stayed out, and so did John Bennett and Colton Herta. That move shuffled the order and actually put Colton up to second place for a while, so he was attacking at the front and actually kept up pace up there pretty well. And yeah, High Tech absolutely rolled the dice a little bit, and ultimately another safety car came out, order reshuffled again, and it didn't quite work out for Holton. But it was a cool strategy, and it was nice to see him racing at the top, and he did finish the race in 8th place. So it wasn't a quiet race for him, and he got his points. So I'm happy that he did well in what was a wet weather race and his first one in an F2 car. So my takeaway on Colton and Miami is this. The weekend wasn't perfect, but it was useful and encouraging. Topping practice showed speed, qualifying still showed weakness, sprint was kind of a wash, the wet weather feature race gave him a ton of experience. High Tech strategy briefly had him up in P2, and he still came away with more points. That's a solid second F2 weekend. It's not breakout, it's not a fairy tale, but it's progress. So as with Cadillac, with Colton, we stay patient, we move forward, and it's progress over perfection every time.
Not bad for a drummer.
And there you have it, folks. That was our Miami GP review. Join us next week where we'll talk more about our Team Cadillac and big stories going around all around the grid. It's every Wednesday no matter what, people, so we will be back here next Wednesday. Stick with me. Peace out.